Hello everyone, thank you for coming to our presentation. My name is David Knockwood, and this is my team, Greg Norris, Eric Sylvester, and then in the crowd we have Stephanie Scott, Jordan Condon, and Carolyn Chi. And we are going to present our Species at Risk Habitat Management Plan for the Meduxnekeag River Association. So today we will be talking about the background of the watershed and our client's request, the goals and objectives of our project, as well as the general approach we took to our problem. We will be then going to split into our two targeted species, Canada Warbler and wood turtle, and talk about our methods of sampling, the results of our assessment, threats we have identified, and parcels of land with recommendations. Following that, we will discuss our recommendations and future management considerations. After our presentation is over, there will be a brief question period. Our client, the Meduxnekeag River Association, is a community-based nonprofit environmental organization. They are located in Woodstock, New Brunswick. The goal of the MRA is to protect and preserve the natural riparian areas and remnant Appalachian hardwood forest in the Meduxnekeag watershed. The MRA has been able to protect these areas by purchasing parcels of land with these features on them. To date, with the help of the Nature Conservancy of Canada, the MRA has been able to protect 850 acres in the watershed. This map here is of the properties owned by the MRA. Highlighted in red are the parcels that we've assessed. So what the MRA is seeking is knowledge of potential Canada warbler and wood turtle habitat in the watershed, and our objective is to expand the amount of protected habitat for Canada warbler and wood turtle within the Meduxnekeag River Valley. The general approach to obtain our goal is as follows. Develop the sampling strategy using critical habitat features for each of our species, create maps of MRA's parcels with % of ideal habitat for Canada warbler, as well as maps of preferred habitat locations along the river for wood turtle. Then identify any potential threats and identify any opportunities for habitat expansion, and then make recommendations for future management actions. And I'll now pass it off to Greg, who'll talk to you about wood turtles.
Thanks, Dave. So the first species at risk that the MRA was looking to gain more knowledge on habitat in their area was wood turtle. And there has been a confirmed sighting of wood turtle on MRA properties in fall of 2016. They were listed as threatened under SARA in 2010, and they're a poikilothermic species, which means they do not regulate their own body temperature metabolically, so they require both terrestrial and aquatic habitat features to fulfill their life cycle. The main habitat requirements of the wood turtle are overwintering sites, which is usually done in pools 1 meter deep that have adequate dissolved oxygen between 6 and 9 parts per million. Wood turtles are opportunistic omnivores, and they prefer to forage in mixed wood forests, where they'll eat things like earthworms and strawberries. For breeding, it's mostly focused around nesting, and their nesting requirements are done in sandy, gravelly substrate on gentle slopes exposed to sunlight to keep their eggs warm. And for thermoregulation, because they're poikilothermic, wood turtles need sunny areas to warm up during the day and water to cool off if they get too hot, as well as water to refuge in at night, as the air temperature will fluctuate more than water temperature. To meet all of these requirements, wood turtles prefer mixed wood forests with open areas adjacent to freshwater systems with flowing water. And wood turtles are not territorial, with more than 70 individuals being reported as congregating together in a single overwintering site. To collect data regarding the wood turtle habitat on the Meduxnekeag River, we elected to do a continuous survey by traveling down a section of the river in a canoe. We went from Jackson Falls, where this one sighting of the wood turtle was, down to Red Bridge Road, which is about halfway down the river of what the Meduxnekeag River owns, and that was just due to time constraints that we couldn't finish the entire river. Potential overwintering in nesting sites were identified as pools that were 1 meter deep. So we'd mark a point on our paddle and stick it in the water, and we'd use a dissolved oxygen meter to determine the dissolved oxygen. And riverbank status was visually assessed to see the substrate and the slope of the bank. And when we found these features, we would make a data point on GPS in order to record it. So that's supposed to be a map, but it's not showing up right now.
Click the bottom button there.
Sorry. Can we exit and go back?
I'm not sure. Technical difficulties.
Hit pause first, 'cause now it's- Sorry, technical difficulties. None of our maps are showing up.
Why is this happening?
Huh?
Are they not showing up on the screen here, or
No,
are they just
they're not showing up on either.
on either?
It's just black.
Why is this happening?
Okay.
I
Okay. Try
Yeah, try
Can
Sorry,
we just
everyone.
close this off for a sec?
What's that?
Is it possible to close this while we're trying to figure it out?
So you're all enjoying the presentation so far? Did you enjoy the refreshments? On live TV, my jokes are all like, probably not. You guys want to know how to catch a moose? So here's how you catch a moose. So you dig a really big hole and you fill it with ash, okay? And then you get the moose's preferred food and you sprinkle it around the edge. When the moose goes to get some meat, you kick him in the ash hole.
Do you have to go?
Why is this happening?
Just go to your drive. Go to your account.
Not gonna lie, a
did
lot of
that.
these are from Cliff. So what's
Go in there.
what's brown and sticky?
Drive.
Stick.
Sure.
Sorry.
Is it different for a tick-covered moose or a brain-root moose?
Yeah, you don't have to push them as hard. They're already like emaciated.
I don't.
We're on,
You didn't do anything different, did you? Like they're all showing up
Yeah,
here.
they showed the first one.
They're all here.
Well, that's the first one. Try to go to the one that I was on, because that one did show up.
There it is. There.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Sorry, folks. We're back. Oh.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. But now here's the map that I was trying to show before. It was just a big black box. But up here is Jackson Falls. That's where the one sighting of the wood turtle was confirmed in 2016. And then these red points are overwintering pools that we identified, and the blue points are sites with nesting potential for the wood turtle. Okay, so now that we knew that there were habitat potential for wood turtle in the area, we decided that we wanted to assess the number of threats to wood turtle and the potential wood turtle population in the area. So threats to wood turtles include agricultural practices, which are considered a threat because of large machinery that can strike and injure or kill wood turtles. Road networks, because increased traffic in an area can result in more auto collisions, which can lead to turtle mortality. Subsidized predation occurs with increased edge habitat in open areas that create greater opportunities for predators for finding and capturing prey. Illegal collection. Wood turtles are very attractive and docile and are often collected for the pet trade. And gravel pits in open areas, when active, heavy machinery can injure and kill, just like the agricultural machinery. And when inactive, the substrate is attractive for nesting females who will go to these open areas and then be more likely to be predated on. So any of these can remove mature breeding adults from the population. And since wood turtles have a long life history pattern and a long time to sexual maturity, removing these sexually mature adults can be detrimental to a population. So to analyze threats, we went with the knowledge that wood turtles travel up to 300 meters from the riverbank, and will also travel several kilometers along a river, but won't travel too far away from it so they can still thermoregulate throughout the day. So using this knowledge, we placed a 300-meter buffer around each potential nesting and overwintering site that we identified, as well as a 300-meter buffer around the entire river. And once we had these buffers established, we assessed the number of threats within them to get a relative rating. So here's just describing our methodology. So once again, Jackson Falls, all our points, red is overwintering pools, blue is nesting sites, and then this purple buffer goes around the entire Meduxnekeag River, and each of these buffers goes around each of the points. So then we'd assess the number of threats within those buffers. So once we knew the threat level within these buffers, we decided to select parcels that would have a high level of threat and proximity to the river within the 300-meter buffer, with the idea that acquiring these parcels would help mitigate these threats over time. So these are the areas that we identified as having high threats to wood turtles in the Meduxnekeag River Valley, with priority being placed on these areas up here near the area that we know there have been wood turtles sighted and near the areas that we have assessed the habitat. In addition to analyzing areas to mitigate threats, we also wanted to look at opportunities to expand protection for appropriate habitat for wood turtles. So to do this, we selected parcels using aerial maps of the Meduxnekeag River and the surrounding area to find wood turtle habitat needs, and then we'd select these parcels as being appropriate for wood turtle. The habitat needs included parcels containing the minimal amount of threats within the 300-meter buffer and containing supporting habitat features, including relatively untouched hardwood forests, mixed wood forests, having gentle slopes and banks for nesting, and we also used a depth to water table map in GIS to identify any tributaries that could also satisfy wood turtle needs. So this map here shows the parcels we identified that we thought would have good wood turtle habitat that are unowned by the MRA, and we're placing priority once again in areas where we figure wood turtle populations will congregate, just because we have not assessed this stretch of the river. So to conclude with the wood turtle, I have here a table with, in the middle, there's parcel ID numbers, those are how the parcels are labeled in the Meduxnekeag River Valley. A priority, high or low, depending on where they were in proximity to the siting or not, and then the parcel purpose in the far right-hand column, which is either threat mitigation or habitat expansion. So now I'm going to pass it on to Eric, who's going to discuss the other species at risk that we were focusing on, the Canada Warbler.
All right. So, thanks, Greg. I'm going to talk about our other species. Like you said, the Canada Warbler. It was also listed as threatened in 2008, and it's been seeing a steady annual population decline since the late 60s of about 4.5% each year. Oh, thank you. They breed in Canada during the spring and summer, as you can see. Maybe exposure isn't great. And they spend a relatively short period of time here on the actual breeding grounds. So here we have their nesting requirements. Essentially, that was the focus for our assessments. They need forest communities with moist to wet soils. They can be indicated or influenced by a high groundwater table, small tributaries, open water, or obvious wetlands. They would like to have a complex ground structure. This can come in the form of raised hummocks, rock cavities, rotting root masses, coarse woody debris, dense ground herbs or woody foliage, and mosses. They also like to have the herbaceous and shrub layers that contribute to that complexity and provide concealment and perch opportunities. A broken canopy is helpful to provide perch trees for the males to sing and attract their females, and that also establishes their territory. So a mature forest essentially will have these successional layers that create that necessary complexity. So these two images here, switch tools, show very different forests. One here has the very dense shrub layer, as you can see, and over here we have not many shrubs, but a lot of coarse woody debris. So you can see how one habitat feature can compensate for another where it's lacking. So to know what the habitat was like in the watershed, we had to establish a methodology. So we used a systematic grid for our data collection, as you can see here. Our grids consisted of 10 by 10 meter plots. They were assessed every 65 meters, so each one of these is 10 by 10. This allowed us to get an accurate representation of what was going on in the overall forest, and the 65-meter distance between each plot ensured that we had an adequate plot density, as males are known to have about a 1 hectare territory size. And then our nesting requirements for each plot were quantified using these data sheets in the field. So as you can see here, we quantified things such as shrub cover, herbaceous cover at different height levels, canopy cover, the substrate, coarse woody debris, etc. So in order to provide habitat rankings for particular data points, those plots, that were sampled in the field, we ranked shrub or herb composition thresholds, and they were established for each individual criteria. So you can see that we assessed at different height classes. So if we use this 1 to 3 meter category, for example, we can imagine taking a sort of horizontal cookie out of here and then looking up at it from above, and how much of the sky would be covered. So that gives you the total percentage for that category. So as I mentioned, for each habitat feature, thresholds were established based on literature descriptions. A ranking from 0 to 5, 0 being the worst, 5 being ideal, was assigned to each of those data sets regarding its contribution to suitable Canada warbler habitat. For example, canopy cover is considered ideal, which would be the ranking of 5, for Canada warbler when canopy cover is about 55 to 75%. This percentage would allow ample sunlight to penetrate down to the forest floor, and that would allow the continued growth of the ground vegetation, and that would also allow perch trees for singing males. All of these rankings from 0 to 5 for each category were then combined for each feature that we assessed on our data sheets, and then that would determine the habitat quality of that entire parcel. After that, in GIS, we used the depth to water table, which Greg already mentioned, and that would increase the quality of a plot if it was in close proximity to high water table or obvious streams. Excuse me. And then all of these combined resulted in a percentage of ideal habitat, shown by these maps. So here you can see maybe our legend. The black is 0% of ideal habitat, red is 0 to 20%, the yellow 20 to 40, 40 to 60 is yellow, orange is before, sorry, and green is the higher quality. So here we have a relatively lower quality site. This is generally because this is a more upland site, and here's a better example with high quality habitat. Morrison Lake, this is mainly due to the fact that this is a cedar swamp, so it's really complex. The only bad habitat here is open water, which they obviously can't nest in. The further maps that we have, this was Bell Flats, same thing, and Van Nuys Falls. So you get the idea. So in New Brunswick, there's a standard protocol for vertebrate wildlife management, and that's to have 10 breeding pairs. Although this standard does not apply directly to the Canada warbler, it's a common practice in New Brunswick in order to give managers a goal for which to aim. In theory, having a minimum of 10 breeding pairs means that that localized population would be more stable, have less chance of being affected by a large disturbance, and it should offer more genetic diversity. Energy and Resource Development, formerly known as DNR, Department of Natural Resources to most people, of New Brunswick created a working classification system for the 2012 to 2017 forest management period for forest conditions and their associated habitat and the relationships they have with the vertebrate species. So depending on the species, the total area needed for 10 ranges would vary. So although the Canada warbler is not one of the warbler species excuse me, in that original document, this is the common practice used in the province, and therefore the best available resource for which to base our potential density targets. So we grouped our Canada warbler habitat zones into these 4. You can see there. Each zone is made up of contiguous property that's owned by the MRA. So all of the blue is owned by the MRA currently. Each zone had a minimum of 1 parcel that we assessed. So here is Bell Flats. This is Van Nuys Falls. We assessed all of these and obviously all of Morrison Lake. The breeding pair densities that they could possibly sustain were reflected by the habitat quality that we just showed you. So the sum of breeding pair densities for each zone were then multiplied by the total area in that whole habitat zone. And that gives you the total potential breeding pairs for every single zone. So this shows the densities that you could expect at different habitat qualities. So these are our habitat qualities that I already told you about, and these are the densities that you could expect per hectare for these qualities. We should note that these densities are from various studies done throughout North America and were used to establish expected densities in our study site based on recorded densities in similar habitat. So for example, high densities up here were based on maritime lowland ecoregions that are similar in composition to our high quality areas, where the low densities are from more upland sites in New Brunswick, like the poor quality upland sites that I had showed you. So if we want to know how many breeding pairs each zone could sustain, we'll use Morrison Lake as an example. We know the total area of Morrison Lake, about 50 hectares, and we want to know the total breeding pairs. So through the quality of Morrison Lake, we can establish that there's a nesting pair potential of 9.4 pairs in that total 50 hectares. So that means each pair in Morrison Lake would need about 5.4 hectares. So if we know that, then we can establish how many additional hectares with this total are needed to reach the 10 nesting pair goal. So Morrison Lake, being of high quality, doesn't need much, which is great. So the other thing we looked at, similar to the wood turtles, were the potential threats. So we localized these to Meduxnekeag watershed, and this kept the focus on issues that are manageable by the MRA. Things such as natural disasters, climate change, and habitat degradation in their overwintering habitat. Unfortunately, we're outside of the extent of this project, and we didn't quantify those. So the threats we narrowed it down to are these, as you can see here. Cat predation, this was indicated by the number of houses in a zone. Anthropogenic collisions and increased access by road density. Pesticides, which leads to prey reduction for the birds, was indicated by the total area of all the agriculture. Increased predation, was measured by calculating the percentage of the perimeter for a parcel that was exposed. So that could be, for example, not continuous forest. It would then go forest to agriculture. And then the last thing we looked at was land conversion. So we used available maps, aerial maps from '96 to 2015 to quantify significant areas of change that have been converted, for example, from a forest to agriculture through time. So then we used a range of buffers from around each parcel, from 100 meters to and then 100 to 300 and 300 to up to a kilometer. Obviously, the closer the threat is to the parcel, the greater the issue. We measured the threats for each parcel, and we ranked those in a relative manner, meaning that the average was taken for the total, all of the parcels that we assessed, and then those that were above the average would be flagged as a higher threat. So with that, we can see all of the parcels that have higher threats for each of those categories. So this is an example here. We'll use Keenan Ridge parcel that we assessed. So here's the total average for example, house density in the 1,000-meter buffer. The average for all of the parcels for house density within the kilometer was 18.5. Here you can obviously see it's higher, and the same with these ones. So we had to make the recommendations based on meeting that 10 nesting pair criteria, as well as those relative threats to the parcels. So that means we have to weigh our options. Do you want to acquire a low amount of land, but there's a lot of threats to that parcel, or the opposite? So this led us to select parcels that we would suggest to the MRA for acquisition based on the expansion of high quality habitat with relatively low threats. So here we have our ideal situation, Morrison Lake. It has high quality habitat, as I already told you about, and it has similar habitat adjacent to it. It needs very little land, like we showed. There was about 3 hectares, so this parcel here would meet that 3-hectare criteria to reach the 10 breeding pair target. And luckily, Morrison Lake also had relatively low threats in all of the categories. Next, you can see Van Dyne Falls and the owned MRA properties, and this one presents 2 options, so either one. However, Van Dyne Falls needs a lot more area, and it had moderate threats overall. So these are the southeastern properties, which are made up by 3 separate ones, Hamilton Point Wildflower Park and Keenan Ridge, and it needed a lot of additional land to meet that 10 nesting pair goals because of the low quality habitat. So both of these would have to be acquired to reach that 10 nesting pair goal, but these parcels have relatively low threats. And then finally, the Bell Flat zone. So Bell Flats is here, and then the additional MRA properties. So 2 options are presented here. Those north of the river, there's multiple properties here, and then the single one south of the river. You need large areas for both of these, as well as this zone had high potential threats overall. So here we have the same sort of table as the wood turtle. This shows the recommended parcels by their PID in the center. And then they're ranked in order of highest priority based on that minimal area needed to reach the 10 nesting pairs and low relative threats, and then the management zone that's associated with it. And I'll pass it off to Dave.
So we recommend that the MRA acquire the parcels that we have recommended as soon as possible. However, we are aware that this is not always possible due to financial constraints and the fact that we do not take into consideration whether or not it was privately owned or if there is private residences on the land. So in order not to compromise the importance of protecting the species habitat, when not possible to purchase, we suggest land easements and targeted stakeholder education. So a land easement would be an agreement between the MRA and a landowner and would result in the landowner agreeing to change their land use practices. For example, the landowner would agree to raise the blades on their lawn tractor when mowing close to the river as to not strike wood turtle. These would be handshake agreements and not like a legal contract, as a legal contract may scare away potential participants in this. And just for example, people that may be in this group would be farmers as they work and live on their farms and they may not want to sell out their livelihoods, or cottage owners as they use their properties for leisure. Mitigation through education is an effective way for the MRA to reach out to the public to teach them on a hope they become better stewards of the watershed. One way for the MRA to do this would be through open house meetings. Open house meetings are essentially community meetings where all are welcome to come and sit and hear what the MRA has to say. The public is then able to voice their opinions or any questions they may have concerning the talk that the MRA gave. These meetings can be targeted towards different stakeholders, such as farmers, the general public, or watershed landowners, and they would explain risks associated with each of these. And it's a really great way for the MRA to have an open dialogue and be able to interact with the public. Since not everyone will be able to make it out to open houses, there should be an alternative way for the MRA to reach out to stakeholders. Pamphlets are a good way to reach out to stakeholders who do not have time to come in and watch these open house meetings. Pamphlets, much like open house meetings, can be targeted towards different stakeholders. And these pamphlets should include basic information such as background on the MRA, information that is tailored to different stakeholders, and then contact information if the stakeholder would like to talk with the MRA or have questions. So here is an example of a pamphlet that could be targeted towards a stakeholder, and this one is targeted towards farmers, and it gives you the basic background of the MRA, as well as a few risks associated with each of our targeted species with farming and mitigations that are possible for the farmers, as well as contact information at the end. If they have any questions about the pamphlet, they can contact the MRA and have a discussion with them. So another way to reach out to the public is get them informed and involved in the watershed is through surveys and public involvements. Wood turtle surveys are a great way to do this, and these surveys would be hosted and guided by the MRA and would be open to anybody in the public who would be interested in participating. These are done during the springtime as the turtles, the vegetation in the turtle habitat is not grown up yet and they're easier to spot. The MRA could use the maps that we've created as the maps we've created of prime areas of habitat, and conduct these surveys there to increase your chances of seeing wood turtle. Data collected could be things such as age, sex, and location, and this data would be used to gain a better knowledge of the species in the watershed. Canada Warbler point count surveys are another way to get the community involved as well, and these would be done during the summertime during breeding periods. The MRA could use the maps that we've created to target surveying areas to the prime habitat. And the information gathered would provide a presence-absence of Canada Warbler in the various MRA parcels. So we would recommend additional sampling as we have not completed all the parcels that they own, as well as finishing sampling the river, as we've only sampled from Van Dyne Falls to Red Bridge Road. We would recommend sampling from Red Bridge Road to the mouth of the river, which is in Woodstock, so that they would have a complete catalog of wood turtle habitat in the river. And we understand that the ecosystem is dynamic and always changing, and by that I mean it will like continuously mature and change with age. So we recommend it would be necessary to follow up assessments after 5 years. so they can have up-to-date information in the watershed. So to conclude, we have summarized both species' top recommended parcels for the MRA to protect into these two tables. First off, we have the wood turtle in the center. You can see the parcel IDs and their associated priorities and purpose. The parcels recommended for threat mitigation are high priority because they have the most potential threats in close proximity to the overwintering and nesting sites that we've confirmed. The parcel recommended for habitat expansion had low potential threats, was close to the river, and had critical habitat features. All of the highest priority parcels for wood turtle are within the section of river that we have sampled and confirmed that had the necessary overwintering pools and nesting sites. The highest priority sites that we've recommended for Canada warbler are listed here alongside their associated habitat zones. The highest priority is attributed to the least amount of potential threats, as well as the least amount of additional land needed to meet the 10 nesting pair goal. So here's a map of the priority parcels outlined in red. So it is worth noting that several parcels that we have recommended overlap for both Canada warbler and wood turtle. Protection of these parcels would satisfy both species objectives simultaneously. Therefore, this increases their priority for acquisition by the MRA. And here is a map of the overlapping parcels. So lastly, we would like to thank our professors for facilitating this course, as well as other professors for guidance and knowledge. And finally, for our client for working with us. Thank you very much. Questions?